It takes an extraordinary kind of person to be President of the United States. So it makes sense that many of our Oval Office occupants had some outrageous origin stories. From wartime adventures to UFO sightings, some of our future chief executives saw some seriously wild stuff go down. So, today we're going to take a look at presidents who lived wild lives before taking office. But before we get started, be sure to subscribe to the Weird History channel. After that, leave a comment and let us know what other presidential topics you would like to hear about. Okay, time to party like, Grover Cleveland? To destroy some of Shakespeare's property, or not to destroy some of Shakespeare's property? That is the question. And the answer for two future U.S. presidents was an enthusiastic to destroy. Before either of them put their feet up in the Oval Office, John Adams and Thomas Jefferson were both living in England. Perhaps sensing they were both bound for executive office, the two struck up a friendship and toured the country together. Along the way, they saw the sights, took in the history, and severely damaged some of it. We are specifically referring to when Adams and Jefferson visited the historic Stratford-upon-Avon, home of William Shakespeare, where some of the Bard's property was still on display. The two men were desperate for a souvenir, and since there wasn't a t-shirt shop, they did what anyone with a stunning disregard for history would do. They chipped off a piece of Shakespeare's chair. In fairness, this was a common thing for visitors to do, and nobody is 100% sure the chair really was Shakespeare's. But it might have been, which, is why they took a piece of it in the first place. Jefferson's shard of Shakespeare's chair still exists, and was even recently on display at his home in Monticello. Andrew Jackson may have been America's toughest president. But how tough was he? His hard-edged style of leadership as a military officer during the War of 1812 earned him the nickname of Old Hickory. And when he was 67 years old, he pummeled a would-be assassin with his cane. So, pretty hardcore. Jackson honed his hothead temperament fighting in multiple wars and several smaller martial engagements, which is a polite way of saying he participated in over 100 duels. Yes, Jackson was a bit duel crazy, challenging anyone who dared question his honor or that of his wife's. Apparently, Jackson was a bit of a wife guy. Because he survived long enough to pass away at his home in bed, you're probably assuming that Jackson did okay in all these duels. And that's kind of true. He was shot twice, and one time he actually eliminated his opponent, the especially unlucky Charles Dickinson. The two men got into a fight over a horse race, and then Dickinson unwisely insulted Jackson's wife. Ugh, rookie mistake. Dickinson was also the first to draw blood in the duel, hitting Jackson with a non-lethal shot to the chest. Jackson quickly shot back, and that, as they say, was that. Dickinson's demise dealt a blow to Jackson's public image, but not enough to keep him from getting elected president. Abraham Lincoln, also known as Honest Abe or Hatbeard, stood 6 feet 4 inches tall, which is still good enough to make him America's tallest president. And by all accounts, Abe was only too happy to use his size to his advantage before his presidency as a renowned wrestler. In fact, there's only one known record of him ever being defeated. Seriously? Had he lived in another era, he would have fought The Undertaker at WrestleMania. But Lincoln's fighting attitude went beyond the ring, too. For example, there was the time in 1842 that a political opponent named James Shields challenged him to a duel after Lincoln had called Shields out pretty hard in an editorial about Illinois banking policy, which apparently was the height of fighting words back then. Shields demanded an apology, but Lincoln refused. It was at this point that Shields challenged Lincoln to the duel. Lincoln accepted on the condition that they fight with broadswords. Whoa. Broadswords. Maybe that movie about him hunting vampires was onto something. The duel happened on September 22nd at a place in Missouri appropriately called Bloody Island, but it didn't last very long. Lincoln immediately showed off his incredible strength by swinging over Shields' head and cutting through a tree. That was enough to bring Shields to his senses. Well, that's enough to take the fight out of anyone, and a truce was quickly called. There were apparently no hard feelings, though. The two later fought on the same side of the Civil War, and President Lincoln even nominated Shields for a promotion after he dealt Stonewall Jackson his only defeat. Before he became one of the most unanswerable trivia questions to ever hold the office of the presidency, Grover Cleveland served as the sheriff of Erie County, New York from 1871 through 1874. And one of his duties while he occupied that office was executing folks. Interestingly, Cleveland had the power to delegate that particular duty if he wanted to, but he insisted on doing it himself. He was a hands-on kind of guy. Cleveland draped the noose over a few people, including Patrick Morrissey, who had been convicted of whacking his mother. Oh, his own mother, not Cleveland's. And John Gaffney, who had shot a man over a gambling dispute. However, that execution did not go so well. Contemporary reports suggest that Cleveland messed up the procedure, and as a result, Gaffney took 23 minutes to perish. Which probably felt twice as long for Gaffney, and everyone there to witness the execution. Possibly because of how badly it all went down, Gaffney would be Cleveland's last execution. Nonetheless, Cleveland was thereafter known as the Hangman of Buffalo. Theodore Roosevelt may be the namesake of the teddy bear, but the man himself was not exactly what you'd call cuddly. Which is a shame. That mustache looks as soft as a silk pillow. Roosevelt was about as rough and tough as presidents come. Among other things, he was an amateur boxer, a bison hunter, a cattle rancher, and a sheriff's deputy. While climbing the ranks as a politician, Roosevelt took a real interest in the Spanish-American War, which is another way of saying he was desperate to fight in it. He loved killing things. Roosevelt abandoned his political aspirations and organized his own volunteer cavalry, which was technically called the 1st United States Volunteer Cavalry, but was popularly nicknamed the Rough Riders. Roosevelt himself led the Rough Riders in their legendary charge up San Juan Hill, although ironically, most of them were on foot. The Rough Walkers doesn't sound as good. Shortly after getting married in 1899, Herbert Hoover and his wife Lou moved from California to China. Hoover was to consult the Chinese emperor on mining operations. It sounds like it should have been a pretty cushy gig, but unfortunately for the Hoovers, the new job was interrupted by the Boxer Rebellion, which broke out in 1900. The Boxer Rebellion was an uprising led by a group called the Society of Righteous and Harmonious Fists, which sounds like the bad guys in a Double Dragon game. Many members of the group, which was opposed to colonialism, Christians, and foreigners in general, were trained in what we now call martial arts. Back then, those fighting skills were known as Chinese boxing, hence the name Boxer Rebellion. As rebels began a month-long siege of Shenzhen, where the Hoovers were living, Hoover helped build barricades while his wife volunteered in a hospital. Some accounts claim that Hoover managed to rescue some children to keep them safe from the urban warfare. Not bad, Herb. Even though he did not live to serve a full term in office, John F. Kennedy remains one of the most popular presidents. But long before he took the Oval Office, JFK was already considered an American hero. And when we say hero, we mean the right out of an action movie that would totally blow your mind kind of hero. During World War II, Kennedy served on the PT-109, a patrol boat in the South Pacific. On August 1, 1943, a Japanese destroyer struck the craft, sending most of the crew into the water. Kennedy immediately sprung into action. He ordered all the men remaining on the boat to abandon ship, and then led the crew to safety on an island that was 3.5 miles away. Of course, after a hit like that, not all the men were able to swim on their own. But that did not stop Kennedy. A former member of Harvard's swim team, Kennedy towed an injured comrade all the way to the island by pulling the man's life jacket strap in his teeth, like Benji. Kennedy would spend the next few days hiding his men from the Japanese forces while doing everything possible to get them rescued. This included swimming against the current to several other islands while again towing the injured soldier with his teeth. In the end, it all paid off, and the men of the PT-109 were rescued on August 8th. Man, how could you not vote for that guy? Given how his presidency ended, it might be a surprise to learn that Richard Nixon was an expert poker player. Really, man? You couldn't have bluffed your way through Watergate? In a Life magazine interview from 1970, one former Navy man who gambled with Nixon recalled the future president being the best player he had ever encountered. He also recalled seeing Nixon bluff an opponent out of $1,500 while holding nothing but a pair of deuces. For the record, that's the modern equivalent of roughly $12,000. Another Navy man couldn't remember ever seeing Tricky Dick lose a hand. Not even once. Nixon's skill at poker was especially ironic given that he grew up in a Quaker family that did not believe in gambling. So where did he pick up his skills? According to one biography, it was in the military. Nixon reportedly funded his first congressional campaign in 1946 with money he won playing poker while in the Navy. Man, maybe they should have put him in rounders. George H.W. Bush has a reputation of being a mild character, and a man who would not hesitate to throw up on foreign dignitaries if the situation calls for it. In fact, while he occupied the White House, he was routinely labeled a wimp by the media. That's why a lot of people would probably be shocked to discover that the elder George Bush was actually a daring bomber pilot during the Second World War. In his time behind the stick, Bush flew 58 combat missions and even survived a crash landing. But his most harrowing experience came a bit later in the war. While serving in the Pacific Theater in September of 1944, Bush and his squadron were sent to attack a Japanese installation on an island called Chichijima. During the mission, the future president and his men came under fire from anti-aircraft guns. Bush took fire, but managed to drop his payload and head back towards the ocean before bailing out into the water. He spent 2 hours on a raft waiting for rescue, and later won the Distinguished Flying Cross for his heroics that day. Before the war was over, he would also be awarded 3 air medals and receive a Presidential Unit Citation. Not bad for a wimp. So what do you think? Which of these future presidents do you think led the craziest life? Let us know in the comments below, and while you're at it, check out some of these other videos from our weird history.